My name is Emily, and by all outward appearances, my life was enviable. I was 35, a marketing professional with a career I had worked tirelessly to build. I lived in a charming apartment in the city, decorated with little reminders of trips abroad and achievements that once made me feel proud. I had a small circle of friends who sent polite texts on birthdays and a family that checked in every now and then. For years, I believed I was happy, or at least, that I had everything I needed to be happy. My days were packed with meetings and deadlines, my evenings with mindless scrolling or streaming shows I wasn't fully watching. There was no shortage of noise in my life, and for a long time, I mistook it for fulfillment. But cracks had started to form in the facade. A missed dinner here, a canceled plan there, until the invitations stopped altogether. Relationships that once felt solid now felt distant, like I was speaking to people through fogged glass. My nights grew quieter, my phone chimed less, and the silence began to stretch into something unbearable. The breaking point wasn't a dramatic event, it rarely is. It was a series of small, unnoticed moments, a birthday spent alone, a weekend with no calls, the realization that I couldn't name the last time someone genuinely asked how I was doing. Loneliness is often seen as a shadow, something to escape or fix, but it became something else for me, a mirror, forcing me to confront truths about myself I had long ignored. It was transformative, but not in the way I'd expected. This is the story of how I reached that moment of realization, and what I learned about loneliness and myself along the way. Before I truly understood the depth of my loneliness, my life appeared picture-perfect, or at least functional. I was what most would call successful. My career in marketing had taken years of long nights and endless effort to build, but I had finally earned a managerial role. I worked in a fast-paced environment with colleagues who exchanged jokes during coffee breaks and congratulated each other on milestones. Yet, the connections rarely extended beyond the office walls. My social life was, on the surface, fine. I had a small group of friends I'd known for years, but as adulthood crept in, so did distance. There were the inevitable relocations for jobs or partners, new priorities like marriages and kids, and the unspoken assumption that we'd pick up right where we left off during our infrequent catch-ups. We texted on birthdays and occasionally liked each other's posts on social media. It was enough to maintain the illusion of closeness, but not enough to sustain it. Family gatherings were much the same, polite conversations and well-meaning questions about work or vacation plans, but never delving into anything deeper. My parents had long since retired to a quiet town a few hours away, and though we called every few weeks, the conversations felt like obligations rather than meaningful exchanges. Then there was my romantic life, or lack thereof. I had been single for a few years after a relationship that ended amicably but left me wary of trying again. The few dates I did go on felt forced, like I was performing a version of myself I thought people would find likable. The truth was, I didn't feel likable, at least not in the way that mattered. Looking back, there were signs of isolation, but they were easy to ignore amidst the chaos of daily life. The silence in my apartment didn't feel lonely at first. It felt peaceful. I told myself I enjoyed the freedom of being able to do what I wanted when I wanted. I mistook my independence for contentment. But there were cracks, small ones at first. Friday nights spent staring at my phone, waiting for someone to text first. Weekends that stretched endlessly, filled with errands and chores, but no conversations beyond pleasantries with a cashier. I began avoiding social events, convincing myself I was too busy or too tired, when the truth was, I didn't know how to reconnect. Even at work, where I interacted with people daily, I started to notice how surface-level those interactions had become. When colleagues laughed about weekend plans or shared photos of family vacations, I'd smile and nod, adding a generic comment, but feeling like an outsider looking in. One memory stands out vividly now. It was my birthday, and though a few coworkers had brought cupcakes to the office, the day passed mostly like any other. That evening, I bought myself dinner from my favorite takeout place, returned home, and lit a single candle on a slice of cake. I told myself it was enough, that I didn't need anyone to make the day special. But the silence in the room felt deafening. What I didn't realize at the time was how much I had started to fade into the background, not just in other people's lives, but in my own. I was there, but not fully present, navigating life as if on autopilot. The connections I thought I had weren't as strong as I believed, and the person I thought I was, strong, independent, self-sufficient, was slowly unraveling under the weight of unacknowledged loneliness. These subtle signs didn't register as warning flags back then. They were just part of the routine, easy to dismiss with excuses. I'm just tired, or everyone's busy these days. But they were there, building up quietly until they couldn't be ignored. Little did I know, the moment of realization was just around the corner, and it would force me to confront everything I had been avoiding about myself and my life. It happened on an otherwise ordinary day, one of those gray, uneventful Saturdays when the world outside seemed still, but my mind was anything but. The weather mirrored my mood, overcast, cold, and uninviting. I had spent most of the day scrolling aimlessly through social media, watching snapshots of other people's lives unfold in bright, curated frames. Laughter, celebrations, shared meals, they all flashed across my screen like a taunt. The apartment was silent, save for the faint hum of the heater. My half-finished cup of coffee sat on the table, long gone cold. The walls felt closer than usual, the weight of their stillness pressing down on me. I glanced at the clock, 5:43 p.m. The evening stretched ahead like a blank void, and I realized I had no plans, no one expecting me, and no one to call. My phone buzzed, a notification. For a moment, hope flickered. But it was just a marketing email. I tossed the phone aside and sank deeper into the couch. Then it hit me. I was completely, utterly alone. It wasn't just that no one was physically there. It was the deeper truth I had been avoiding, the realization that my life had become a hollow shell of what I thought it was. No one was reaching out because no one truly needed me in their lives. And worse, I wasn't sure if I needed anyone either, or if I even knew how to. In the quieter moments, when distractions failed and I was left alone with my thoughts, I couldn't help but grapple with bigger questions. What does it mean to be truly alone? Is loneliness just a lack of people, or is it something deeper, a disconnection from oneself, from the world? I thought about the times I had felt lonely even in the presence of others. Sitting at a dinner table surrounded by friends, yet feeling like I didn't belong. Walking through a crowded park, acutely aware of the absence of a hand to hold. It wasn't just about being physically alone, it was about feeling unseen, unheard, unimportant. The more I reflected, the more I realized that loneliness might be a universal experience. Everyone, at some point, feels the weight of disconnection. It's a part of being human, isn't it? The need to belong, to be understood. And yet, the very act of being human also seems to guarantee moments of isolation. I began to wonder if loneliness had a purpose. Was it trying to teach me something? To force me to confront parts of myself I had been avoiding? To make me appreciate connection when I finally found it? In some ways, loneliness felt like a mirror, reflecting truths I didn't want to see. It showed me how much I had relied on others to validate my worth, how little I had invested in my relationship with myself. It was painful, but it was also illuminating. Perhaps loneliness wasn't something to be feared or avoided. Perhaps it was a call to go deeper, to explore the parts of myself that had been neglected. To learn that being alone didn't have to mean being lonely. But these realizations didn't make the experience any less excruciating. They didn't erase the ache of empty rooms or the sting of unanswered messages. They didn't fill the void. Still, they planted a seed of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was a season, a painful, necessary chapter in a story that wasn't finished yet. And maybe one day, I would look back on this time and see it not as a period of suffering, but as a turning point. For now, though, I was still in the thick of it, navigating the depths of loneliness one day at a time. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that drifts by without leaving a mark. I had wandered into a small bookstore I'd passed 100 times but never entered. The air inside was warm, carrying the faint smell of old paper and coffee. As I roamed the aisles aimlessly, my fingers brushed against a book with a plain, unassuming cover. The title caught my eye, The Courage to Be Alone. Something about it felt like an invitation, or maybe a challenge. I opened it to a random page and read a passage that stopped me cold. Loneliness is not a punishment, it's an opportunity. In the stillness of solitude, you can hear the voice of your soul. I stood there for what felt like forever, rereading those words. For the first time, loneliness didn't seem like something to escape from but something to face. I bought the book and took it home, devouring it in one sitting. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying the author's words in my mind. They sparked something inside me, a tiny ember of curiosity, a question I hadn't dared to ask before. What if loneliness wasn't my enemy? What if it was my teacher? But the real turning point came a week later. Emily, my eldest daughter, came to me, holding a mug of tea. She sat down beside me on the couch, hesitating before she spoke. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling. "I know you're struggling. I see it every day. But we're struggling too. I miss you. Lily misses you. You're here, but it feels like you're not." Her words pierced through me. I had been so consumed by my own pain that I hadn't realized how much it was affecting those around me. For the first time, I saw my loneliness not as something that only isolated me, but as something that was isolating my family. It was a wake-up call. The next day, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living this way. I didn't know exactly how to move forward, but I knew I had to start somewhere. My first step was reconnecting with Emily. That evening, I sat down with her in the kitchen. "Emily," I said softly, "I'm sorry. I know I've been distant. It's hard to explain, but I want to try." For the first time in what felt like years, we really talked. I shared my feelings, my fears, my struggles with loneliness. And she shared hers. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. By the end of the conversation, I felt a weight lift, as though I had taken my first breath in ages. Inspired by that moment, I reached out to Sarah, my best friend. I had avoided her calls for months, but now I picked up the phone and dialed her number. "I've been a terrible friend," I admitted when she answered. "But I need you." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'm here," she said simply. And she was. Together, we made plans to meet for coffee. Sitting across from her at the cafe, I realized how much I had missed the warmth of connection. She listened without judgment as I poured out everything I had been holding in. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of my loneliness. I also started taking small steps to rebuild my life. I began journaling again, but this time with a different purpose, not just to vent, but to reflect. I wrote down things I was grateful for, no matter how small. The sunlight streaming through my window. A kind word from a stranger. Emily's laughter echoing down the hallway. I returned to therapy too. This time, I committed to the process, no matter how uncomfortable it felt. With the therapist's guidance, I began to unravel the tangled threads of my loneliness, understanding its roots and learning how to nurture myself in its shadow. I even took up yoga, something I had always dismissed as not being my thing. But the quiet, meditative practice gave me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For an hour each day, I was present in my body, focused on my breath, free from the weight of the past and the worries of the future. These steps were small, almost imperceptible, but they marked the beginning of a shift. Slowly, the fog started to lift. The most surprising change came when I began opening up to others. At first, it felt terrifying, sharing my vulnerabilities, admitting my struggles. But the more I did it, the more I realized how many people had felt the same way at some point in their lives. Their stories mirrored mine in ways that were both comforting and humbling. Through these connections, I learned something profound. Loneliness thrives in silence and secrecy. The more I spoke about it, the less power it held over me. Rebuilding relationships was like mending a torn fabric, delicate, slow, and requiring care with